My name is Tyson. I'm a Senior Technical Account Manager at Equinox IT Services. Thanks for having me. Today, I just want to talk about the top 3 cybersecurity threats that are facing healthcare. So as we kind of go through each of these, I'd like to just kind of open the floor and let's talk about some of the things that you guys may have been experienced or have seen, or just questions that you guys might have. So we're gonna dive right in. The first one, and this one has been on the list in healthcare for the past 10 years, and it kind of keeps rising to the top over and over again. Even though we saw a slight dip in 2024 across healthcare, it's still one of the top 20% of the attacks that happen, and healthcare is a big component of that. Does anybody not know what ransomware is? Has anybody never heard of that? Not sure what it is? It's kind of hit mainstream media, but basically what it is bad guys take over your data and they hold it hostage. And if in order for you to get it back, they ask you for what? Money. Right? Usually a Bitcoin or something like that, right? And nowadays, what they do is they actually try to copy your data. So not only do they lock you out of it, but they try to copy it somewhere. So even if you unlock it, they still have it, right? And so that's what ransomware is. How does it impact your systems? Has anybody been in a ransomware attack where this has actually happened? Yeah, what happens?
You kind of have to lock down a lot of different things.
Yeah.
In particular, we used to have our EMR where you could look at it from home, and it was just really accessible. We had, you could look at it from any device. We had to shut down all devices and just run everything straight through the VPNs or through the clinic.
Yeah.
So you had to be on site. You had to have an actual device that was assigned by the company.
Yeah.
It was a lot of work.
Yeah.
And it was just recent. It was just like 2 months ago.
Yeah, this is still happening. And when ransomware happens, usually what happens is you just lose access, right? I can't access my stuff from anywhere. I can't access it at all while it's happening. There's 2 threats that are becoming bigger and bigger, and the biggest one is actually starting to go after the cloud, right? So cloud is such a big target that nowadays they're starting to go after backups, logs, archives, any of that data that you may have said, oh, I don't need this right now. I can put it in cloud storage, put it somewhere else where maybe I don't care about it as much. That's one of the biggest attacks that are starting to happen across healthcare. And then the other one is session-based. So this is like getting into individuals' computers or individuals' accounts and then spreading from there. And usually that's because we don't have good authentication or identity management tools, right? So like 2-factor authentication or SSO or some of those things that are kind of key to protecting those user accounts. One of the big things that HIPAA and NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, kind of aligned on is this term called role-based access, where if you have the highest level of access in the company, then you should have the least amount of access to technology, right? Which is kind of weird when you're like, what do you mean? I need all the things. But from a security standpoint, you need to kind of lock it down to where you're just not able to access things from everywhere, right? Just because you have a high level of access in the company. So I'm gonna tell you a story because I've been part of a lot of these over the years. And so as part of this company, I was at Equinox and I was working with this large company. It was actually a security system company. I've been trying to convince them for years just to upgrade their antivirus, right? They had a really old, antiquated antivirus. And what happened is they actually got an email that pretended to be a QuickBooks invoice. And one of their managers, who insisted on having high-level access into the system, fell for it. And so bad guys got his credentials and they started spreading. And so I got a call at 5 a.m. on a Saturday saying like, hey, our main system is down. I don't know what's going on. So I got in there, and as I was in the server, I can actually see these bad guys detonating this ransomware. So they're actually like locking out all their different databases and locking out all their systems, right? Luckily, I was able to get in there and kick them out. I found out the credentials that they were using, able to kick them out of the system, but not before they did damage. And so I ended up working 36 straight hours because we had to recover their entire environment, right? And so when ransomware happens, you have 2 choices. You either recover from a backup from before the ransom took place, or you pay the ransom and hope that they give you your data back, right? That's it. Those are kind of your 2 choices. And so luckily they had backups from before that ransom took place, and we were able to recover. It just took us 36 hours to recover, but they did not lose any data. So had that ransom of happened probably at any other time, there's a good and this was a 24/7 company. If this was like a normal company where they don't work on Saturday, then they probably would have locked out everything and they probably would have lost data, right? Same attack happened that same weekend to another company in Salt Lake City, and they were down for 9 days, right? So ransomware has a big impact, and it has a big effect on healthcare. And so that's why it's kind of one of these top 3 threats. And so there's some good things we'll go through later, talk about how you can combat these and what you can do to kind of help protect your clinic, protect your people. The next one is phishing. I know everybody's heard of phishing by now. And so I thought I'd ask a question. Does anybody know the difference between phishing and spear phishing? Has anybody heard of these 2 terms? Okay, phishing, think of it like casting a wide net, right? So bad guys are just sending fake emails, fake texts, fake messages out to as many people as they can, just hoping to get something, right? Where spear phishing is they're gonna do some legwork, right? So this is bad guys are gonna use your LinkedIn, they're gonna use your company website, they're gonna use social media to do a targeted attack. They're gonna spear that attack towards you either as an individual or as a business, right? So it's much more fruitful for them to do that because if you can let your guard down, then they're gonna get what they want, right? And so one thing that I put on here that I think people need to be aware of is bad actors are starting to use AI more and more and more, right? So AI, super helpful tools, can really help our clinics, can really help us with our day-to-day workflows, but it also helps the bad guys because their messages, their emails, all their things are becoming more and more and more believable, right? And they're actually pulling information from just public sources, social media, and then just other data from like victims that have worked, right? So as they target other healthcare clinics, they're like, ooh, well, what worked there? What do I see in their environment that I can use for this next attack, right? And then what happens with phishing is it just leads to access. All they want is access to the data because then they can sell that data for money. So I feel like in healthcare, there's a big stigma around email. And a lot of times providers especially are like, I'll just use my personal email. That's easier for me than using a work email. But what are some things that you guys have seen as you're starting to see these fake emails and see these attacks and just kind of navigate these different types of issues in your clinics? What are some things that you guys have seen or some thoughts that you have? Yeah.
So a couple weeks ago, someone emailed one of my employees and asked for them to go, well, it said, hey Casey, I need help. I'm just running out of time. Can you go out and pick up $10, $50 gift cards for an employee?
Totally.
To be able to support them through their hard times.
Yeah.
And it looked exactly like me.
Yep.
Right? And it was signed Brad Powell. If you looked at the email at the top, it was not my
It's like a random Gmail or something.
It was random.
Yep.
And luckily, we had trained on this extensively, and he knew what it was. He's like, yeah. And he even said, like, use your company cards to purchase these.
Yep.
It was very, very convincing, and they're getting very good at what they do.
Mm-hmm. I actually had a company where an employee fell for that, and they went out and they bought like $2,000 worth of gift cards with their own card because the person said that they'd be reimbursed, right? But luckily, they went to the CEO and they like put it on his desk instead of just taking pictures of all the codes and stuff and sending it to the bad guy. So the CEO was like, "What the heck is this?" And now they do Employee of the Month and they give out gift cards. But yeah, it's real, and they're getting really good because they know how to sound like a boss, right? So yeah, good one. That's something that's part of business email compromise. Business email compromise is this. The FBI came out a couple years ago and said this is one of the biggest threats facing businesses, and bad guys use all these different techniques, impersonating lawyers, impersonating bosses, pretending to be the government, like all those type of things. That's what they do. They just try to get money, get information. Yep. I've seen them with payroll too. Have you guys ever seen those where someone sends an email and they're like, "Hey, change my direct deposit information," right? Pretending to be an employee. Happens all the time, right? What else? Yeah.
We had one that they came in, like our admin executive sent an email to our payroll company saying we cut a check for these invoices, and it it went all the way down. They had the checks already and just needed a signature from me and my partner. And we were like, wait, what is this? And
Yeah.
I mean, there's some checks there that stopped it, but still, it got pretty far.
Yeah. And if you have a payroll company that doesn't have good checks in place to like stop those things and they just let it through, that's bad. I've seen that too. So, but yeah. Any other experiences with phishing or thoughts there? Yeah.
I have one where I'll do like Facebook Marketplace or something and sell some things, and so I've had it happen a few times actually. Now I'm aware of it, and it felt wrong. But they asked like, "Hey, can you? I can only transfer so much into your account." And it was just, it seemed really fishy, but it's like a scam that they have where they'll say they need to transfer this much, so you'll transfer some back. And
totally. Yeah, a lot of times they do it with Zelle. It got to the point with Zelle where now they have like disclaimers above like Zelle when you're sending payments and stuff, because what they'll do is say, hey, I have a limit on how much I can send. Here's this fake email from Zelle saying that I can only send so much. So if you send me this, I'll send you the rest, right?
Yeah.
So just trying to get something from you. But pretty crazy. I've seen some really intense spear phishing ones. You know, I work with companies in a lot of different industries, and wire fraud is a big deal out there in some of those. And so I've seen some where bad guys try to jump in at the last second, change wiring instructions, right? Say, oh, we had to change, send it here instead, right? Just trying to get them to do it. And so it's pretty tricky, but I'm glad you brought up training, because training is one of the best ways to help employees understand these threats and what you need to do to kind of protect yourselves. So, all right. The last one that I want to talk about is cloud vulnerabilities. A lot of times, does anybody know when you say the cloud, what is it? What's the cloud? It's just someone else's server. That's the cloud, right? So when you have your data hosted on Microsoft's cloud, that just means you're on Microsoft's servers. That's it, right? So Google's servers, Amazon's servers, that's what it is, okay? And so you can have your own private cloud, which is, it's my server, right? And so, but cloud vulnerabilities are just growing and growing and growing, and this is where these data breaches like Change Health and all these massive ones that have hit your industry have come from. And it's because these massive organizations have vulnerabilities that they're not fixing, right? And it's not even your fault, right? So a lot of times your data is out there with these trusted vendors, and they have vulnerabilities and they're not doing the basics, and they get breached, and then all of a sudden your patient data is exposed, right? And so one thing that I highly recommend that companies do is take a posture management tool to kind of address any cloud vulnerabilities. Now, there are some things that are outside of your control when it comes to some of your vendors and things like that, but I always recommend having a list of questions or due diligence forms or something that you have your vendors fill out. That way you understand what they have in place and what things that they might be weak at, right? So especially when it comes to like, okay, if you go down, what do I do? Like, what's my plan, right? If my EMR goes down because it's cloud-based, what do I do in the meantime? How do I access my patient data? Do I have to go full paper, or like, what's my plan, right? Understand their recovery time objectives and the recovery point objectives for these companies, right? And so, and then also just understand your supply chains, understand where things are coming from, and understand how many different hops of vendors do you have in order to get the data that you need, right? And so these are just some of those things with cloud where cloud is awesome. I'm not saying it's not, right? But everything has limits and everything needs to be understood from a cybersecurity standpoint, because it's not impervious, right? In fact, cloud vendors are bigger targets now, and that's what the bad guys are really going after, are these cloud vendors, right? That's why companies are starting to switch into this hybrid mode where they're like, you know what, I do want some of my stuff hosted locally, and then I do want some of it in the cloud, right? Because I don't want all my eggs in one basket. So when it comes to cloud vulnerabilities and you guys as vendors, what things have you guys seen? What are some concerns that you have, or some thoughts that you might have had over the years as you've switched to cloud or switched off of cloud, or et cetera?
I think you just said it. What happens if they get?
Yeah.
We just think everyone's good.
Yeah.
If we ask the questions, we're trusting a lot of these sources.
Yeah, I mean, and
So if they're getting hacked more and more, trying to, I was at the airport when Delta got hacked,
yeah.
and it was crazy just to see airplanes and stuff that day, about a year ago. And it was just one or two things,
Yep.
and it can mess up the whole industry pretty quickly.
Yeah, it really can. That CrowdStrike outage was massive, right? I had a lot of friends at airports too, and it was just chaos. All because a cloud vendor made a change, right, that took down all these systems, right? A change that they didn't vet. That was the issue, right?
What do you do to protect it? I mean, obviously we're using cloud so much in everything we do, Microsoft or
Yep.
our EMR system. So what is?
Yeah, so one of the best things to do is bring in a third-party tool that helps you understand your setup inside that cloud, right? Especially Microsoft or Google, those type of things. Because what these companies do is, even though your data is there in the cloud, they say your data is mine, but it's your responsibility, right? So if something happens, they're like, oh, that's your fault. So they have like their own limits where it's like, oh yeah, we'll back up your data for 15 days, or we'll have an archive of X amount, but if you're not doing anything beyond that and you lose your data, that's your fault, right? So that's where we usually recommend bringing in a third-party tool to kind of analyze that environment, make sure you have the right procedures in place and processes in place and policies in place to really protect your data, to really meet HIPAA guidelines, to really make sure it's archived properly and backed up properly, right? Those type of things. When it comes to the actual third-party vendors, that's where you really got to bring in due diligence. You got to bring in a way for that vendor to prove to you that they have the right things in place should they go down, right? So, like, there's an EMR that got breached twice in 2023, right? And there was their full cloud environment is what got breached, not their on-premise environment. And so, with that breach, these companies started kind of asking these questions like, I've been down 2 days, like what am I supposed to do here? I can't access my data. I have to go back to paper charts. And so I always recommend just start asking those vendors like, what's my SLA here? Like what am I supposed to be expecting from you as far as recovery time? When can I pull that data and get it somewhere else, right? And so at what point do I need to invest in a different solution, right? Or a backup solution, right? So yeah, tricky questions with cloud, but the big thing is making sure that these companies are taking care of their vulnerabilities, and that's where having the right due diligence and having the right forms and questions that you're asking them matter, right? So usually once you kind of push on them to say, hey, give me this type of information, that's when they'll give it to you and you'll understand your risk, right? Yeah.
Is there any sort of like federal oversight of these third-party, like it seems it's like the Wild West?
So yeah, no, that's a great question right now with our current political landscape. And so, like, yes and no. There are some federal regulations, but they're getting loosened. And so, like, it's a tricky world where they do have guidelines they have to follow. And especially if they do business across seas, then they have even stricter guidelines that they have to follow, right? But a lot of times they'll do just the bare minimum, right? And so, and then make you pay if you actually want to have, oh yeah, we offer geographical redundancy, but you got to pay for it, right? Oh yeah, you could totally have your data spun up somewhere else, but you got to pay for it, right? So that's usually what happens.
They're being loosened for like what reason, I guess? Like, is it
Just cost. Like, I think,
cheaper for them?
yeah, I think that's it. So they haven't announced all the things that they're changing, but changes are going to come. It happens with every administration. So, but yeah. Any other questions? Okay. I wanted to just talk briefly about the overall impact and damage that these things have. And I always think it's good for people to be reminded of HIPAA penalties, right? So these numbers change every year, right? And so this was a survey done across thousands of healthcare organizations. I thought this was just really helpful. Like, how does it impact my business? The biggest impact is just disruption of patient care. I can't see patients, right? And for you guys, that's everything. And so financial loss is next. And when you kind of take a look at these different types of penalties and how it can impact your company, your clinic, that's a big deal. Reputation is a huge deal in healthcare, right? So if you start having to communicate to your patients that their information has been exposed, has been leaked, has been compromised, like, you take a hit, right? It happens. And then legal penalties with HIPAA and stuff like that come into play. So, but I thought it'd be worth just understanding a little bit, like, these two are a big deal. Willful neglect is a big deal. If you know that what you're doing is against HIPAA, and then you don't correct it after you get the violation, like, that's a big deal, right? And that violation can be per record, right? You do have a cap. You have a cap that happens, but it can be this massive amount of fines, right? And so we want to make sure that we're not doing things, being told, let's fix this, and then we continue to do it wrong anyways, right? So yeah, I thought this is just helpful to understand the new charges and things coming in 2025. So, any questions on this and potential damage that can happen? Cool. All right. If I were to give you 3 key takeaways, these would be my 3 takeaways. So 1, be proactive. So having a proactive stance in cybersecurity is a big deal, right? You want to cover your bases before the hack happens, not after, right? If you're a large enough company, you can recover, right? When Target got breached in like 2018, 2019, they were able to recover, right? Because they're a huge company. When you're a smaller company, it's even harder, right? Use a framework. HIPAA and NIST have aligned. And so HIPAA guidelines and NIST guidelines now are more aligned than they ever have been, right? NIST, National Institute of Standards of Technology, right? And so they're the ones that kind of lay out the cybersecurity guidelines. They're the government side of things, right? And so, and then prioritize proactive over reactive. Don't react to things, proactively take care of things, okay? Employee training is a big deal. So when it comes to phishing and when it comes to just threats, the human element is a massive element, right? And so I'd say foster a culture of cybersecurity awareness, right? And this is done through the right tools, through the right trainings, through the right different safeguards that you put in place to just make sure they understand their role in protecting patient data, right? And then again, trainings is key. Like whether it be in-person trainings, whether it be an online platform, they're all great, but I highly recommend putting one in place. Then just use technology. Technology has some really awesome solutions. A lot of them are built into the software that you use now. You just have to know how to implement it, right? But set up multi-factor authentication or SSO. Make sure you have access control policies and access control implemented across your company. That role-based access we kind of talked about briefly, right? Use email controls so you can combat phishing and business email compromise. And then invest in technologies that are built for detection and response, right? Yeah.
Does access, I know you talked about access control a little bit, but does that mean that every person in the company has an assigned device?
Yes.
And they can't look it up from their phone? It's like, this is your device.
So phones are kind of this like, I'll call it a gray area where I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that they could have other devices as long as you have them following a proper like policy or if you're an M365, you can enroll those devices to where they have to follow like a company like template or policy, right? Where it's like, hey, you can only use this device if it stays up to date, if it doesn't have any of these blacklisted programs, right? If it's enrolled in like the company. And so I know it gets tricky with people in like their personal devices, but there are options in there where you can say this is a personal device. Don't search through their photos and all this other stuff, but just focus on these things, right? And so, but having something like that in place is really key. And so there is a compliance component of Microsoft 365 where you can say, hey, only compliant devices can access email or access our OneDrive data or whatever it is. And that can apply to personal devices too. And so those are some cool things that I would say, yeah, put that in place.
From my understanding, Microsoft 365 is so much more secure than Gmail.
Yes, Google is not ideal, just in the sense that it does have some cool things specifically on email, but it lacks some of these other things that you can do to kind of lock down these devices and do whatnot. It has 2FA, which is great. So if you're on Gmail, that's okay. Just make sure you have the right tier where you get that BAA, and then also, or it's compliant, right? And then also, have MFA enforced, not optional. And so, just some of that stuff, yeah. But yeah, invest in technologies like EDR. This is where personal devices are a problem, right? People want to use their personal devices to connect into the network, to connect into the software. And if those devices aren't protected, like that's where some of these threats that we've seen can leak in, right? And so I'd recommend taking a stance on those where you at least have a policy, right? Where it's like, hey, if you're going to use a personal device, you're going to follow these rules, right? So at least have that. That's like bare minimum. But I highly recommend that policy include technology, right? So there should be some tools or something that get put in there as part of that policy, right? And then, EDR and MDR tools are key now. You need those things that where if ransomware to take place, you'd want that single endpoint to get isolated, right? Where it's like the second it starts getting encrypted, you want it removed from the network, right? And that's where some of these other tools come in because they will do that and do that really well. That's kind of what actually ended up saving us with that one story I told where we started deploying one of these tools and immediately started isolating these endpoints off the network. So really helpful. That's all I got. Thank you.